of it, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from New York Institute of Technology, now offering a Master of Public Health program, helping to produce leaders and innovators who create stronger, healthier communities. Learn more at nyit.edu.
This is WNYC New York. I'm David First. This American Life is coming up next on 93.9 FM. It's Freakonomics Radio next on AM820. And tomorrow, the Omicron surge has not been felt evenly across the city, with some zip codes witnessing much higher rates of severe disease. Tomorrow on Morning Edition, WNYC visits the neighborhoods of Coney Island and Brighton Beach, where COVID death rates over the past month have been nearly 3 times higher than the citywide average. Again, tune in for the story tomorrow morning on WNYC. It's 1 o'clock.
This is WNJT FM Trenton, WNJO 90.3 Toms River, WNJY 89.3 Netcom, and WNJP 88.5 Sussex.
From WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life. I'm Eric Glass. So, a while back, Brian Reed, who at the time was the senior producer of our show, and he recently finished this great 7-episode podcast called S-Town. He was going around giving speeches every now and then about S-Town, and he was giving a speech when a journalism student in Birmingham, England, approached him and told him a story, something that had been big news there. And there was still a mystery at the heart of it that nobody had ever solved. And Brian decided to team up with the student, and honestly, they have been like dogs with a bone running this down through many twists and turns, and officials trying to avoid them or shut them down. The student, Hamza Sayed, is now a former journalism student and somebody who was in all of our lives. He moved here to the United States to finish the story, which became much too big to fit into 1 or 2 episodes of our program. So our colleagues at Serial took it over to turn into a podcast series. Sarah Koenig, the host of Serial, became their editor. The series rolled out this week, and it's spectacular, completely original. I'm very excited to play you the first installment of the show today on our show, so you can hear what it's like. I defy you not to get caught up in the story the way that we all were. And so with that, I'll hand things over to Hamza for part 1 of the Trojan Horse Affair.
This is my first story as a journalist. I hadn't planned for it to be my last story, but it probably will be, given what's happened in the years I've been working on this. It's about a letter that surfaced in my city and had huge consequences for Britain. This letter launched 4 government investigations, changed our national policy, and ended careers. It's hurt some of the country's most vulnerable children. A letter that many people who've seen it agree is ridiculous.
It's unsigned, undated.
Didn't it look like a serious document, did it? It just seemed comical. What the hell is this? I remember looking at it some time thinking, what on earth is this?
The infamous letter, was it written on parchment, in blood?
So you're presenting me with a document that turned our lives upside down.
I first learned of the letter in 2014. I wasn't a journalist then. I was a doctor, quit medicine, living in Birmingham, England, making my breakfast at 1 p.m, listening to the news, when I heard about the discovery of a secret communique between Muslim extremists. They were discussing a plot to infiltrate our city schools and run them on strict Islamic principles, potentially with the aim of radicalizing students.
PSD.
Had a code name, Operation Trojan Horse. And over the next several months, this snowballed into a huge national story.
A number of schools in Birmingham have been infiltrated by hardline Muslims.
Radical Muslim headlines like Islamist plot, jihadist plot, alleging a conspiracy by all, and the government responded with full force. The Prime Minister got involved, convening his cabinet to discuss the threat.
Muslim agenda.
The national government sent in a bunch of investigators, including Scotland Yard's former head of counter-terrorism, to look into 24 schools in majority Muslim areas of Birmingham. Like I say, it was all very frightening. Until, a few months later, when the various investigators finally started reporting their findings. They'd found no plot called Operation Trojan Horse. They'd seen no signs that anyone had been radicalized, no evidence of violence or planned violence. They didn't bring any terror charges against anyone working at the schools they'd looked into. But despite all of that, despite finding no plot, investigators still concluded that Muslims had influenced the schools in a dangerous way. Government officials snapped into action.
Things that should not have happened in our schools were allowed to happen. Our children were exposed to things they should not have been exposed to.
The fallout has been huge. Prime Minister David Cameron, as we said, is calling a special meeting.
Officials removed educators, revamped schools and renamed them. They mandated all schools in the country start teaching what they termed British values to make kids less susceptible to extremist ideas. They beefed up Britain's counter-extremism laws by making public sector workers like teachers and doctors part of the state's surveillance apparatus to now inform on their co-workers and students and patients. Today, the prevailing narrative of the Trojan Horse affair is that a bunch of Muslims were up to no good. There is another version of the story, though. That version of the Trojan Horse affair is that nothing happened, that these bearded brown educators were set up, and the nation fell for it. And it's always seemed to me that there's a simple way to figure out what really happened. The letter. Even with all the government inquiries, no authority, none of the investigators ever figured out who wrote it. Remarkably, none of them even tried. And that, to me, seemed like a pretty glaring oversight. The reason the country was looking at these schools with suspicion, the reason they were investigating them at all, was because this dodgy letter showed up, portraying the people who worked there as nefarious plotters, claiming they were sneaking Islam into schools like a Trojan horse. The letter is what put that idea in authorities' heads. So I didn't see how you could know what Operation Trojan Horse was or wasn't unless you got to the bottom of the Trojan Horse letter. Who wrote it and why? A few years later, I decided to go to school for investigative journalism. But my professor wasn't completely sold on the story I wanted to report for my student project, Operation Trojan Horse. This was investigative journalism. He wanted me to unearth something new, not rake over some years-old story. As a doctor, though, I'm familiar with the concept of a second opinion. So the night before my master's was set to start, I went looking for one.
A doctor came to see me for a second opinion. One night in fall 2017, I'm in a theater in Birmingham. After my podcast S-Town came out, I went around doing some Q&As. Afterwards, people will sometimes come backstage to chat. And so this guy comes in, introduces himself as Hamza Syed. He said he was changing careers to become a reporter. He was beginning a master's program in investigative journalism the next day, actually. And he wanted some advice. He was speaking fast, like I might walk away at any moment.
To be fair, I was told I had 5 minutes with Brian Reed, after which I'd be escorted out the building.
I did not know that. Anyway, Hamza ran through the Trojan Horse story for me, elevator pitch style. I'd never heard of it, but a guy I was with backstage, a producer I know from the BBC, he had. And he jumped in as Hamza was talking. Yeah, Trojan Horse, he said. That was a big thing a while ago. Some bad stuff went down, Muslim educators have been up to no good, but it was cleared up. Old story. There was something Hamza said, though, which afterwards I couldn't get out of my head. He kept talking about a letter, which had set off this whole cascade of consequences, whose origins were still a mystery. So when I got home to New York, I read the letter. It looked like a caricature of a missive between two terrorists, filled with Islamophobic tropes about conniving and scheming Muslims. It's missing pages. Parts of it are too dark to read, like it got jammed in the Xerox machine. It instructs the recipient to destroy it after reading. It struck me as a funky document for a government to take seriously, especially because from what I read, the government hadn't even looked into who wrote the letter, or why. There was a strange lack of curiosity about this instigating document. I thought to myself, it seems like somebody should try to figure out who wrote that thing. And then I thought, well wait, this journalism student's doing that. Maybe I ought to give him a hand. And here we are, years later, at the end of a dizzying, farcical, and enraging investigation, in which one mystery led to another, tracing this letter's path of destruction across multiple continents.
In defiance of many unhappy officials and some aggressive attempts to shut our reporting down.
From Serial Productions and the New York Times, I'm Brian Reed.
I'm Hamza Said.
Presenting to you the most elaborate student project ever. This is the Trojan Horse Affair.
I got the call from Brian while I was in class. My phone started ringing from a New York number. I asked my professor if I could take it. He said no. I asked if I could go use the toilet. He said yes. I answered, and Brian told me he wanted in on my investigation, but that I would need a producer. I said yeah, sure, or casual. I had no idea what a producer did. Soon, he started getting in touch with missions for me to complete. First one, he'd secured a recorder for me in Birmingham and said there was something I had to do.
It was supposed to be a basic bread and butter assignment. Go record a meeting. Hamza had seen an event advertised called Trojan Horse, The Facts, where some of the educators who'd been accused of carrying out the plot would be speaking publicly. They insisted the Trojan Horse Affair was just an Islamophobic stitch-up. The event hashtag was Trojan Hoax, and they were trying to clear their names. They'd never gotten their lives back on track after the story died down. They'd lost their jobs and been made into pariahs by the national media. But afterwards, Hamza calls me and says when he showed up at the spot, the community center at 5 p.m., the receptionist told him,
"It's been cancelled. The event's been cancelled."
Did they give you any, but wait, did they give you any other information? Like, what did they, like?
No, they said it's been cancelled, and that was it. I said, no, this is, I spoke to the event organizer a few days ago. They said, yeah, it got cancelled today. So, I felt like an idiot, to be honest, because I'm standing there with this big, mic stand that looks like a fishing rod. I got my box of equipment.
This can't be a good omen, I thought, to mess up your first journalism assignment. But then, more people started showing up, confused, like me, until a man in one of those safety vests swings around the corner, tells us to follow him, and takes us up the street to a wedding hall where everyone was gathering instead. It's a lot of people, maybe over 100. And as I explained to Brian, while I'm setting up the microphone,
I started catching all the whispers in terms of what happened. And it turned out that the original venue had received phone calls from the national newspaper, specifically this guy, Nick Timothy.
He's like a reporter or a publisher, or what is he?
He's a columnist, I think, for the Telegraph.
And not just any old columnist. Nick Timothy used to be the chief of staff to the Prime Minister. He was essentially Theresa May's right-hand man. I spoke to the guy who ran the community centre, who told me Nick Timothy had actually emailed, not called. He wouldn't let me see the email, but according to others at the meeting, the implication was, if you hold this event, I will associate you with extremists in the newspaper. And that worked. The community centre pulled the plug, and Nick Timothy published a triumphant column, which I'd missed because I was on YouTube all day watching instructional videos on how to use my recorder, in which he confirmed his paper had gotten the event cancelled, and wrote that the proposed meeting was, quote, a shocking attempt to deny the Trojan Horse scandal, and, quote, the people behind the Trojan Horse are trying to do it all over again, and right under our noses.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Trojan Horse or Hoax, the discussion and debate.
So here they were, the teachers and school volunteers, allegedly behind Operation Trojan Horse, along with their defenders, academics and activists, and an educational barrister and a union leader, packed in this wedding hall instead.
I am really, really concerned that simply holding a public open meeting like this becomes controversial. Just the fact